you had mentioned when you first started running your one-on-ones, they were hard conversations. What do you mean by they were hard?
Oh, I just didn't know what I was doing. A good one-on-one is one where you check in with your employee. Whereas I think I started it with, what did you do last week? Right? If you don't feel safe, you're not going to innovate. There's no innovation that's going to happen. My opening question in one-on-ones today is always, it changes the narrative entirely. They immediately feel relaxed. We know that mistakes are going to happen. This is software development. Nothing goes as planned.
Hi, my name is Steph Mills, and welcome to Debugging Tech Leadership, the podcast where we dive into the world of technology leadership. Today on our show, we are joined by a very special guest, Dinah Davis. Dinah is an incredibly experienced technology leader who has worked from small teams to big teams, including VP of R&D, senior manager at D2L, and is also actually an advisor in our startup, CodeGem. Welcome, Dinah.
Thank you. Let's dive in.
Yeah, well, I'd love to talk a little bit about how we actually met. So a couple of years back, I was introduced to Dinah, warm intro, by a gentleman who said I needed to talk to Dinah about what we were building. And it was my first sales call. And like most first, it was pretty atrocious. But Dinah was kind enough not to reject me on the spot. Would love to hear about that from your experience.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was that asked me to talk to you, but somebody I trusted, I guess, because I said yes, as I often do for other women in tech. I remember you pitching me CodeGem, and remember thinking, oh, this is like pretty cool, because as a engineering leader, and at that time I think maybe I was director of R&D at Arctic Wolf, maybe I was VP by then, but the whole thing was, I'd grown Arctic Wolf's dev team from 15 people to probably at that time, I'm gonna guess it was about 75-ish people. And there's a lot of things you need to do to scale the teams and to grow them, and especially when you're promoting new leaders into tech, leadership roles from tech roles, there's a lot of stuff they don't know. And I was just like, oh, CodeGem seems like such a great package, once it's a little more fleshed out. It was a few years ago. And it wasn't quite up at that point to, an enterprise level, high security thing that we would need at Arctic Wolf. But I was really excited about where it was going. So I think you asked me very specifically, is there anyone, what was it you asked me, Steph?
I had my sales script in front of me, and I was reading it off to you word by word, and my question was, are there any other stakeholders in your organization that we need to speak to?
And I was like, you're speaking to them right now.
I think specifically, no. You said, you haven't convinced me yet. I'm not introducing you to anyone else.
Oh, that sounds like me. Yes.
Yes, but you did then say, however, interested in what you're doing, I will talk to you again.
Yes, I did say you could pitch to me again, and I was really interested in what you were doing, right? I'm a big believer in running Agile teams, even though Agile is kind of a dirty word right now, which it shouldn't be, because what's really happened there is people who are just trying to do the Agile ceremonies are doing that, and that's not actually helping people run better, faster, more actually Agile organizations. Actually being, I call it little a Agile, where you can actually pivot and change and move and do things, is really good. But there's a bunch of stats and a bunch of things that you do as a team that's just not, it's not easy to do. It's not intuitive to do. And your tool looked like it was pretty cool. It could do some of those things.
Yeah, definitely. You spoke a little bit before about, so you were at the time, I believe you were VP of R&D at Arctic Wolf. You were managing a whole bunch of people. So how did you get there? Did you start in a leadership position, or what was your personal journey to that point?
Yeah, so I started as a security software developer at Blackberry, actually, in the days of Blackberry before there was even a million Blackberry users. I very clearly remember the Christmas party of 2004 at Blackberry, where there was big signs everywhere that said 2 million thumbs can't be wrong, because we had just passed the 1 million user mark. And so, yeah, I was a software developer at Blackberry for 5 years. And shortly after after 5 years, I had maternity leave. I had my beautiful little baby girl and came back. And shortly after I came back, I was promoted to team lead. And I remember very clearly somebody in the room going, well, that's the least surprising promotion I've ever seen. And that's because a lot of the time, when people are ready to move up, they're already doing a lot of the things that they should be doing. I was already leading a number of projects and helping out my manager and doing some organizational stuff with him. But yeah, it was still like I didn't get any leadership training for that. I just, whatever I kind of had on me already was what I used. And so there was, some interesting learning experiences. And I definitely remember my boss telling me, like, you can't talk to people that way, Dinah. You can't actually, like, just tell them they have to do it. It doesn't work that way. You have to, like, have a little bit more empathy and think about what their day is like. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's true. And then I did end up being able to take some leadership courses through my time at Blackberry. Blackberry is pretty good with that, but they weren't software development leadership courses. They were just like general leadership courses, right? So that it helped you with like the one-on-ones and some of the other stuff that you just never have to deal with as an IC. So that was when I became a leader. That was 2009, and I never went back to being an individual contributor. I really just loved leading people. So from Blackberry, I went to another company as a dev manager. That was a smaller company, and then I jumped to D2L, where the development team had been growing quite rapidly. So I started off with one team as a manager, and while I was there, helped them figure out how to go from 6-month releases to monthly releases with a 4-week test time cycle. So figure that out. So rolling releases is really what it was. And really helped them set up to, like, they bought a tool for the dev team, like Jira, except that it was Rally. I don't know if other people have used Rally. But then they didn't have any explanation as to how people were going to use this together. And I was like, well, if we don't all use it in a similar way, then it's going to be kind of useless. So I figured it out for my team, and then I was like trying to tell other teams, and like, this is how we're using it. And eventually I basically, with input from lots of people, we made basically a guide on how everyone wants to use it.
Interesting.
So yeah, and then the jump to Arctic Wolf, I was specifically looking for a startup that was just coming out of chaos and needed to start scaling up and needed to have a lot of the a little bit more structure around what they were doing. And I always say it's like just enough structure that things get moving and flow well, but there isn't as much chaos, right? Chaos is fine when there's 5 people, right? You like, honestly, you don't need a ticket tracking system. You don't need, like, I mean, tickets are good, but you don't need all of the other, processes laid on top of that. But as soon as you have like 15 people, it's like, it's easy to have miscommunications and things like that.
Definitely.
Yeah. So Arctic Wolf was my little chaos startup that I helped scale up, and that's what I did for the next 7.5 years until this winter, this past winter.
Amazing. I've got so many questions, but what I do want to come back to, I've spoken with a lot of leaders, and a consistent challenge I've heard from all of them is making that leap from individual contributor into engineering manager. No one seems to have had a very easy journey. Why do you think that is?
I think there's generally no training given at all. And I think if we think about like what are the good qualities of like a software developer, qualities of a software developer are like strong problem solving skills and having creativity, having technical proficiency. They're good at continuous learning and attention to detail. They do have to collaborate with their team and have teamwork done and stuff, and have good time management skills. But if you think about what a good leader, the qualities of a good leader, especially, the type of leader that I really aspire to, which is to be a servant leader. The qualities of a servant leader are good listening, like active listening abilities, empathy for their team, fostering collaboration, empowering their team. Managing up is another really big thing that people often don't think about. They often just think about managing down to their new employees, but you also have to manage up, and that takes a lot of advocacy and influencing skills. Project management is another thing that usually gets put on a team lead's plate that there's no training for, that they didn't do as a software developer. And conflict resolution is probably the dirtiest word, I think, because it's the one thing no one wants to do. And especially if you haven't had any training or leadership training, it's really hard. So, the qualities that make an amazing software developer do not necessarily translate to the qualities of an amazing leader. And, some people, when they make that transition after a while, they figure out that they actually don't like this leadership thing, and they go back to individual contributing. But there's very little support. There isn't even tons of books. And a lot of it just gets learned on the job and learned through mistakes. And if you are lucky enough to have a great leader yourself, then maybe you got some great mentoring. I certainly was lucky that way, where I did get quite a lot of good mentorship from my leaders and my peers.
Very cool. So how can we make it easier if you were to go back in time when you were making that leap? How would you have changed it so it was a little bit easier for you to make that jump? What do you wish you had at your fingertips?
Oh, I think that's a really hard question. Like maybe some tools that would have helped guide me on what to do. Like one-on-ones were like a bit of a mess. And I think like learning about what's important and how it's important, and like what are the important things that I have to measure and deliver and do, because like really it comes down to like the day-to-day, or what people think it's like, well, just deliver the features, get your team to deliver the features. That's what you do as a dev manager. You get them to deliver the features. Mm-hmm. But there's so many nuances with that. Think about the idea of a team that's a little bit cranky, that doesn't really like what they're working on, and are finding, maybe their coworkers annoying, and not really feeling appreciated. Think about the type of code and how quickly they will get that done, versus a team who's joyful, who loves coming into work, who's wants to work with each other every day, and they feel valued. Think about the output, like the difference in the output. Like if I were to ask you, I have two teams. One's a little bit cranky. They're really technically great, but they're a little cranky. And I have another team that's like technically good, but they're super joyful. Which one do you want to build your app?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so which one would you pick?
Well, I think cranky developers don't sound quite as fun to work with, that's for
No.
sure.
and you maybe don't even think like, well, are they going to do a good job? Like, are they going to care enough to do a good job? You want that joyful team. You want the team that's, you know, has a higher, you know, what's the word for it? It's not team spirit, but
Morale, perhaps.
Morale. There we go. Thank you. Morale. You want that, right? And so those are not things you're taught how to do, right? And there's not even a lot of people, even your leaders, you know, you might have had a good example, and I did have a good example. So I don't know that there's a lot that could have been different for me, because I had great examples of leaders, and so I learned a lot from them. But it's so easy that you don't, or that your leader is too busy to help support you at all. And so you don't get that guidance, and there isn't a lot of other places to go look for it.
Yeah. Were there any specific resources you looked to, books you read that helped kind of put you in the right direction?
Yeah, so during my time at D2L, they were going through an Agile transformation, which was, they brought in an Agile leader named Gil Broza, and he's just one of my favorite people. And he is really who I learned what real agility is, and how to build agility into your teams, and how to make, and doing that in a way that the morale is also getting pulled up, right? So I love this. There's this book out there called, Steph's gonna cringe. Not cringe, but she's gonna go, oh, the book again, Dinah. There's this book called Accelerate. And the reason I love this book, Accelerate, is because intuitively, after many years of being a dev manager, I felt like happy teams produced better stuff, and that agility led to happier teams. And this book goes and basically completely proves it. Saying that, you know, like the more agile the team is, the higher performing they're going to be, the happier they are, the higher performing they be, the more you're doing things like continuous delivery, continuous integration, all the test automation and things like that, the happier the developers are, because their world works better, their builds run faster, they're able to deploy faster, and it kind of becomes this positive cycle. On the flip side, it can be a very negative cycle, right? If your builds take forever to build, they make some changes and then they sit there and they wait. Now, that's annoying. No developer wants to sit there and wait. They're like, that's a waste of time. Or if any of the tools are hard to use, or, you know, it takes forever to see their code go from, you know, being written to out the door and in the product. Like, there are some companies I was at in my past where there was code on some of the teams that, you know, took a year to get out. And like, there's no satisfaction with that. There's no joy that comes with that, right? So that's why I like Accelerate. I read that a lot later in my career, but Gil really helped me learn what real agility is, what real agile leadership is. And he's a friend of mine to this day now. I learned so much from him. But yeah, so I recommend any of his books. He's got a few different ones.
Very cool. I want to go back to something you said before, and it's a little bit related to Agile. So something we like to say at Cogem is the same way waterfall development moved to Agile, we want to do the same with performance management, and not just poor performance, but good performance as well, by moving that conversation into one-on-ones, making it more frequent. There should be, when you come to your performance review, there should be no surprises, which unfortunately is often what happens today. But you had mentioned when you first started running your one-on-ones, they were hard conversations. Can you expand on that? What do you mean by they were hard?
Oh, I just didn't know what I was doing. I mean, like, in retrospect, like a good one-on-one is one where you check in with your employee. How are they doing? How are they feeling? What blockers do they have? What struggles do they have? What ambitions do they have? What help do they need to achieve their goals, or what help do they need to get blockers removed, right? Whereas I think I started it with like, what did you do last week?
Yeah, I've gotten that question a few times.
What did you do last week? And like, so my opening question in one-on-ones today is always, how can I help? Every single time now, it's just, how can I help? And it changes the narrative entirely, right? They immediately feel relaxed and knowing that you're there to support them. And however, how can I help? It could be like a blocker they have. It could be a frustrating relationship they have at work. It could be, they're trying to achieve something and they want some advice on it. It just opens the conversation up for a much more positive interaction. And that's also my belief with being a servant leader, right? Like, the more I help and elevate the people who work for me, the more we all are elevated, right? Like, my success is their success. It's not at all like, I can't do anything individually that would make me successful when you're running a 150 person, development org. You have to make the people below you successful so they can do their jobs, right? Absolutely. So it's all about serving them and figuring out what they need to be successful.
Very cool. A common challenge I hear about one-on-ones is building up enough psychological safety that team members will actually tell you the problems.
Yes.
What I found is and I experienced this a lot myself, engineers were taught you are a problem solver, and a good engineer is a good problem solver, and problem solving often happens in isolation. So if let's say you're my manager, me telling you I have a problem I'm stuck on is making me feel like a failure. So I don't want to tell you that. How do you cross that gap and create this safety they need to actually tell you the truth?
Yeah, so I think it actually has to be baked in a little bit to the culture of the organization. So, for example, I think every organization should have a set of principles they work by, so that when the leader's not in the room, everyone knows what to do and how to do it. And so I really think we had some of the best ones at Arctic Wolf. And so, for example, one of the principles of our 5 principles was bad news fast. So it was expected, and we would tell people on a regular basis that, we know that mistakes are going to happen. This is software development. Nothing goes as planned. And what we want to do is, as a team, solve these problems really quickly. No one's going to get yelled at because they made a mistake. Mistakes happen. You'll get yelled at if you made a mistake, not tell anyone, try and figure it out yourself. And then, eventually that's probably not going to work. And now we have a bigger mess on our hands. Then you might get not really yelled at, but then, you're not going to get kind words. But coming out and just saying, okay, guys, I think there's a problem. Like, I clearly remember in one of my workplaces, somebody walking out and saying, guys, I kind of deleted all the data in production by accident.
Oh, no.
And you're like, oh boy. All right. How do we recover this? Right? And what was super cool was no one said WTF. No one looked at the person and said, like, how could you possibly make that kind of mistake? Everyone went and looked, how can I help? What can we do? Have you checked here? There might be a backup. And, like, within 2 hours, we had everything restored. So it just is one of those cases where when people, you have to set these base culture values where psychological safety will occur, right? So you can't actually yell at people when they make mistakes. You have to find out the root cause, help figure out how to not make it happen again, and then go from there. And I mean, honestly, it will take time. People have to build trust and earn trust, right?
Yeah.
And so, if it's your first week in a job, you're not going to necessarily feel that safe.
Yes.
But it is something you have to work on for the long term.
So going back to when you're making that transition from IC to EM. So congratulations, Dinah. You are now in charge of 10 new reports. What
I think it was like 3.
Yeah, 10's the high number to start with, but we'll go to 3. So this team's operating in a low trust environment, organization. You don't have as much control over that. How do you, as an individual manager, help to create that trust with your unit?
I really think it's leading with empathy. It's always thinking about what it's like to be in the other person's shoes first. And when you do that on a daily basis, and you it shows through and people see it, right? So, anytime the team has success, it's the team's success, not my success. Anytime we have a failure, the team failed, but I am responsible for that failure because I am the boss. So if anyone's going to have to take the heat for it from above, it's me, not them. Right? So having your team know that you have their back no matter what, and that you're not going to throw them under the bus is really, really important. A good friend of mine, Mike Hart, recently just wrote a big blog post on blameless culture. And it's a fantastic post, and it's exactly how, he ran the DevOps organization at Arctic Wolf, but it's what we had was a blameless culture. So mistakes happened. People were not blamed, but root cause happened immediately. We figured out how to prevent that root cause from happening again. And the overall assumption always is that when a big mistake happens, the person probably didn't have the tools or the information to know that was going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? It's not that they just were lazy or they didn't know what they were doing. They probably did all the things that they thought they should do, and we were lacking something. We were lacking a process. We were lacking a tool. We were lacking a test that could have prevented it. And so a mistake happened. Not they made a mistake happened. Right? And I think that's really important distinction.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's, I think, an attitude I would very much like to embody at CoGEM. And as the team keeps growing, I think the focus on why is super important, and it can be easy to, when we talk about conflict resolution, it's very easy to stop talking about the problem and start people blaming. But as long as you kind of keep pulling it back to the problem, it makes a huge difference.
Yep, that's right.
So my last question for you on the same thread of this is, you are now the VP. You've been promoted from manager to VP. You are now responsible for 3 managers under you. How do you, as a VP, help to encourage those managers to embody these kinds of values?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of this stuff is lead by example. They need to see you, doing what you're saying. Mm-hmm. They also need you to shelter them from the people above you, while they try to learn how to do it properly. Everything, I swear everything comes down to psychological safety, and creating an environment where you feel safe, right? If you don't feel safe, you're not going to innovate. There's no innovation that's going to happen. You're going to just try and do everything as well as you can, but you're never going to go outside of your comfort zone, because when you're innovating, mistakes happen. Things go sideways because you're trying stuff you've never tried before. So you can't possibly know all the different things that are going to go wrong. But I did a couple things like regular one-on-ones, of course, but I also got them training. I sent them to training, leadership training to Gil. We had a really good set of tools in place so people knew, how to use them and what to do with them. We did some of the reporting that the book Accelerate suggested, so we could look at some of the trends that was happening. We had to do that all manually, but it was still worth doing. So I think that's kind of how, and you support your people.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear. I always like to compare good management to going to the gym. It's a lot of hard work, and it's a lot of consistent hard work, and that's how you
Yes.
build a healthy team. And it's so
Yeah,
easy if you take a break for a few weeks, you don't see the problems until they're pretty lagging, the issues that pop up.
that's right.
Awesome. Dinah, do you have anything you'd like to share with our listeners before we hop off?
No, just have awesome days today. Awesome days.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again, Dinah. You
Bye.
also have an awesome day. Bye. Before we wrap up, I want to extend a huge thank you for making it this far with us in this episode. Over 60% of ICs transition into management with little to no training, and similar to Dinah's journey, it's a hard path. If you enjoyed learning from Dinah and would like to work with her one-on-one, Dinah is a verified coach here at CodeGem, and you can book time with her directly through our website, codegem.app, or using the link in the description. My name is Steph, and I'm a co-founder at codegem.app. We're building a new way to lead teams. If you enjoyed this episode, please do us a huge favor by liking, subscribing, and sharing this episode with your peers. Your support means the world to us. Since you did make it this far, please let us know if there's a guest or a topic you'd like us to feature. Thank you again for joining us on this episode of Debugging Tech Leadership. Until next time.